You are holding on to something that is already gone. You are holding on to things that are already gone. And maybe you know exactly what that thing is. Person, a relationship, a friendship, place, a version of your life, a version of yourself. Or maybe it's a moment you keep returning to because some part of you still believes that if you think about it enough, understand it enough, or replay it differently enough, you might somehow change the ending. You remember what they said, what you said, the look on their face, the last message, the last conversation, the moment everything changed. And sometimes you don't even realize how often you return there. You're brushing your teeth, and you're back there. You're driving, and you're back there. You're lying in bed, and suddenly the entire past is playing again. And this time you change one sentence. You imagine saying something different. You imagine choosing differently. You imagine staying. You imagine leaving earlier. You imagine what they might have said. You imagine what might have happened if one tiny detail had gone another way. And for a few minutes, you live in a world that doesn't exist. A world where the ending is different. Then reality returns, and you feel the loss again. This is one of the strangest things about being human. The event happened once, but the mind can make you experience it hundreds of times. And every time you replay it, some part of you is still waiting for reality to become different. But reality has already moved. Only the mind stayed behind. And maybe that's why letting go feels so difficult. Because you aren't simply holding on to the past. You're holding on to the possibility that the past could still become something else. Think about someone you once loved deeply. Maybe you were together for months, maybe years. Maybe the relationship ended peacefully. Maybe it ended terribly. Maybe there was betrayal. Maybe there was misunderstanding. Maybe nobody did anything unforgivable. Maybe life simply moved in different directions. But whatever happened, there was once a version of reality where that person was part of your everyday life. You knew what they were doing. You knew how their voice sounded when they were tired. You knew their habits, their expressions, the little things nobody else noticed. And then suddenly, they weren't there anymore. At first, you miss the person. Then you start missing the routine. Then you miss who you were when you were with them. And eventually, you may start missing a future that never happened. That's a different kind of grief. You're not only grieving what happened, you're grieving what you thought would happen. The trips you imagined, the conversations you thought you'd have, the home you pictured, the person you thought you'd become beside them. And that's why sometimes you can know intellectually that something is over, while emotionally, some part of you is still waiting. Waiting for the message. Waiting for the apology. Waiting for the explanation. Waiting for them to come back. Waiting for the universe to somehow correct the story. But life doesn't always correct the story. Sometimes, the story simply ends. And here's the difficult part. You can understand this intellectually and still not be able to let go. You can tell yourself, it's over, and still check their profile. You can tell yourself, I've moved on, and still wonder what they're doing. You can start a new relationship, and still compare. You can move to another city, and still carry the same memory. You can delete the photographs, and still remember every detail. Because letting go isn't something you accomplish by making a statement. You can't simply announce, today I am over it, and expect your entire inner world to obey. The mind doesn't work like that. You don't let go by force. You let go by gradually stopping the fight with reality. And those are two very different things. Imagine holding a rope. On the other side is something you desperately don't want to lose. You pulls back. You pull harder. Pulls harder. Your hands hurt. Your body becomes exhausted. But you refuse to release the rope because releasing it feels like admitting defeat. So you keep pulling. Now imagine someone tells you, you don't have to win. You don't have to pull harder. You don't have to make the other side come back. You can simply open your hand. At first, that can feel terrifying. because you've spent so much energy holding on that you forgot what your hand feels like when it isn't clenched. That's what attachment can become. You grip something because you're afraid of losing it, and eventually the grip itself becomes the source of your suffering. Think about a memory, a beautiful memory, maybe a childhood home, person you loved, a group of friends, period when life felt simpler. Maybe there was a version of yourself who laughed more. Maybe you were younger. Maybe you had fewer responsibilities. Maybe you didn't know how complicated life could become. And sometimes you look back and think, I just want that time back. But you can't go back. Not because you failed. Not because you didn't appreciate it enough. Simply because time doesn't work that way. That moment was beautiful partly because it was temporary. You didn't know it was the last time. You didn't know you were living inside a memory while it was happening. That's the strange tragedy of life. We often recognize the preciousness of a moment only after it becomes something we can no longer touch. And then we try to preserve it. Photographs, messages, old songs, old places, old conversations. We keep pieces of it. And there is nothing wrong with that. The problem isn't remembering. The problem begins when remembering becomes a refusal to live now. You can keep the photograph. You don't have to destroy it. You can remember the person. You don't have to hate them. You can love what happened. You don't have to pretend it meant nothing. You can appreciate who you were. You don't have to reject your past. Letting go does not mean saying, none of it mattered. Sometimes letting go means saying the opposite. It mattered deeply, and that's why I don't need to keep fighting with the fact that it ended. That's a much more honest form of acceptance. Because sometimes people think moving on requires emotional amnesia. It doesn't. You don't need to forget. You need to stop asking the past to become the present. There's a difference between carrying a memory and carrying a demand. A memory says, that happened. A demand says, it should have happened differently. A memory can be peaceful. A demand keeps you trapped. A memory can sit quietly inside you. A demand keeps knocking on the door. What if? Why? If only. Maybe. Perhaps. And these little words can keep someone mentally trapped for years. Think about the phrase, if only. If only I had said something. If only I had stayed. If only I had left earlier. If only they had understood. If only I had been more confident. If only I had noticed. If only I had made that decision. If only, and maybe one of those things is true. Maybe you genuinely made a mistake. Maybe you could have handled something better. But here's the problem. Knowing what you would do differently today does not give you the ability to go back and become today's version of yourself inside yesterday's circumstances. You didn't know what you know now. You didn't have today's experience. You didn't have today's perspective. You were acting from the person you were at that time. Maybe you made mistakes. Of course you did. You're human. But endlessly punishing an earlier version of yourself doesn't improve the person you are now. It only keeps the earlier version alive. Imagine meeting your younger self. The version of you who made that mistake. The version who trusted the wrong person. The version who stayed too long. The version who left too soon. The version who didn't speak up. The version who was afraid. Would you really want to spend your entire life standing over that person saying, how could you have been so stupid? Or would you perhaps say, you didn't know. You were trying. You were scared. You were learning. You made the best decision you could with the awareness you had. And then, you can stop carrying this now. Because maybe forgiveness isn't only something you give other people. Maybe sometimes, you have to forgive yourself for being a person who was still learning how to live. There is another kind of thing we hold on to. Not a person. Not a memory. A version of ourselves. Maybe you miss who you used to be. You think, I used to be happier. I used to be more confident. I used to have ambition. I used to have so many friends. I used to be fearless. I used to enjoy things. And now you look at yourself and feel like you've somehow lost the person you were. So you keep trying to get back. You try to recreate the old routine. Listen to the old music. Visit the old places. Reconnect with old people. But something doesn't fit. Because you are not supposed to become your old self again. You're supposed to continue becoming. The person you were served a purpose. They got you here. But they were never supposed to remain frozen forever. Think about a tree. Nobody looks at a tree and says, "Why aren't you still a seed?" The seed was beautiful. But the seed had to disappear for the tree to exist. The tree doesn't betray the seed by becoming something different. It fulfills it. And maybe some versions of you have to disappear too. The insecure version. The desperate version. The version that needed everyone's approval. The version that stayed in situations that were hurting you. The version that believed love meant being needed. The version that thought success would finally make you worthy. You don't have to hate those versions. You don't have to destroy them. You can simply let them become history. Sometimes we think letting go means losing. But consider this. A child loses their childhood. But did they lose it in the same way they lose a possession? No. Childhood became part of them. The experiences remain. The lessons remain. The memories remain. The person simply changed form. Maybe that's what many endings are. Not disappearance. Transformation. A relationship becomes a memory. A friendship becomes a chapter. A home becomes a place you remember. A failure becomes wisdom. A painful experience becomes compassion. A version of yourself becomes the foundation for another. The thing isn't necessarily erased. Its form changes. And perhaps that's what we're actually afraid of. Not losing the thing, but losing the form in which we knew it. Think about water. You can hold water gently in an open palm. It sits there. You can feel it. You can appreciate it. But close your fist around it, and it escapes through your fingers. The tighter your grip, the less you actually possess. This is one of the paradoxes of attachment. You think, if I hold on tightly enough, I won't lose this. But sometimes the grip is exactly what makes it impossible to experience peacefully. Love can become control. Memory can become obsession. Care can become fear. Desire can become dependence. And eventually, the thing you wanted to preserve becomes the thing that consumes you. This doesn't mean you should stop caring. That's another misunderstanding. People sometimes hear "let go" and imagine becoming cold, detached, indifferent, emotionless, walking away from everything. That's not what letting go means. You can care deeply without clinging. You can love someone without needing them to stay. You can remember someone without needing them to return. You can miss a place without needing to live there again. You can be grateful for the past without demanding that it repeat itself. That's not indifference. That's love without possession. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons about relationships. You can love someone and still not be meant to continue with them. You can have something beautiful and still have it end. You can be grateful and still walk away. You can miss someone and still know that going back would be wrong. These things can exist simultaneously. The mind wants simple categories: good or bad, stay or leave, love or hate, success or failure. But life is rarely that clean. Sometimes, "I love you and I cannot continue this relationship" can both be true. Sometimes, "that was one of the best periods of my life," and "I'm glad it's over" can both be true. Sometimes, "I miss who I was," and "I don't want to become that person again" can both be true. Growing up means learning to hold contradictions without desperately trying to resolve them. And this brings us to something deeper. Why do we replay the past so much? Why does the mind keep returning? Because the past feels like something we can still work on. The future is uncertain. The present is uncontrollable. But the past looks fixed, so the mind tries to rewrite it mentally. It tells itself, "If I can understand exactly what happened, maybe I can finally be at peace." But understanding isn't always the same as accepting. You can understand why someone left and still wish they hadn't. You can understand your mistake and still regret it. You can understand why a relationship ended and still miss the person. Understanding can explain the past, cannot reopen it. And sometimes the mind keeps searching for one final piece of information because it doesn't want to accept the only answer that matters. It happened. That's it. Not every ending comes with closure. Sometimes there is no final conversation, no perfect explanation, no satisfying conclusion. Sometimes the person doesn't understand what they did to you. Sometimes they don't regret it. Sometimes they moved on before you did. Sometimes they remember the entire situation differently. And if your ability to move forward depends on another person giving you the perfect explanation, you have handed them control over your future. You may wait years for a conversation that never happens. But closure isn't always something someone gives you. Sometimes, closure is the moment you stop requiring the past to explain itself before you allow yourself to continue. Imagine you're reading a book. You reach a chapter that ends badly. You hate the ending. So you keep rereading the chapter. Again, again, again. You analyze every sentence. You search for clues. You imagine alternative endings. But the next chapter is still waiting. And eventually you have to make a strange decision. Do I want to spend my entire life rereading one chapter? Or am I willing to discover what comes next? That's what life is asking you. Not, did the chapter matter? It did. Not, was it painful? Maybe it was. Not, did you love it? Perhaps you did. The question is, are you willing to turn the page? And turning the page doesn't mean tearing the old page out. It stays in the book. That's important. You don't need to erase your history to have a future. Your past can remain. Your memories can remain. The people who changed you can remain part of your story. But they don't have to remain in control of the next chapter. So how do you actually begin letting go? Not tomorrow. Not after you feel ready. Now, the first step is brutally simple. Stop arguing with facts. If it's over, let it be over. If they left, they left. If the opportunity is gone, it's gone. If the person has changed, they've changed. If you're no longer who you were, you're not. You don't have to like the fact. You don't have to celebrate it. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. But stop spending energy trying to make reality admit that it should have been different. Reality doesn't negotiate with you. It simply is. The second step is to distinguish grief from resistance. Grief says, I miss this. Resistance says, this shouldn't have happened. Grief can move. Resistance stays. Grief allows the tears. Resistance keeps asking why. Grief remembers. Resistance demands repetition. So if you are hurting, don't immediately try to eliminate the pain. Let yourself feel it. Sometimes the fastest way through an emotion is not around it. It's through it. Sit with the memory. Let the sadness exist. Let yourself acknowledge. Yes, I wanted this. Yes, I loved this. Yes, I wish it had been different. And then, but it isn't. That last sentence is painful. But it is also where freedom begins. The third step is to stop feeding the imaginary version. This one is difficult, because the mind loves fantasy. You may not be attached to the person anymore. You may be attached to the version of them inside your head. The version who finally understands. The version who comes back. The version who apologizes. The version who chooses you. The version who becomes exactly who you needed them to be. But that person may not exist. You may be grieving a possibility. And possibilities are dangerous because they never have to prove themselves. Reality has flaws. Fantasy doesn't. You can create the perfect version of someone in your mind, and then compare real life against your imagination. Of course, reality loses. So sometimes letting go means allowing the imagined future to die too. The fourth step is to bring your attention back to what is actually here. Not what used to be. Not what might be. What is. Look around you. Where are you right now? What can you hear? What can you see? What is your body doing? What is actually happening? You may discover something strange. The past exists as memory. The future exists as imagination. But your actual life is happening now, and you have been absent from it. You've been living inside old conversations while your real life continues without you. People are growing. Seasons are changing. Your body is changing. New experiences are waiting. Opportunities are appearing. And you may miss them because you're staring backward. Imagine sitting on a train. The train is moving forward, but you're facing backward. You can see everything you've passed. The old station. The old landscape. The places you just left. And because you're looking backward, feels like the train isn't moving. But it is. Your life is like that. You can stare at the past so intensely that you forget you're already moving. Whether you're ready or not, the train is going forward. The question isn't whether you can stop it. You can't. The question is whether you will spend the entire journey staring at the station you left, or turn around and see what's ahead. And maybe you're afraid of letting go because you think, if I stop thinking about them, it means I didn't love them. No. You don't prove love by suffering forever. You don't honor something beautiful by destroying your present because it ended. If anything, sometimes the healthiest way to honor something is to allow it to have been beautiful without demanding that it continue forever. A sunset doesn't become meaningless because it disappears. A song doesn't become worthless because it ends. A flower doesn't fail because it eventually dies. Its ending is part of its nature. And perhaps some things are beautiful precisely because they cannot stay. We have been taught to think permanence equals value. If it lasts forever, it was real. But that's not true. Some of the most important moments of your life may last minutes. A conversation, a look, a goodbye, a decision, a day. A person who appears for one season and changes you permanently. The duration doesn't determine the meaning. Something can be temporary and still transform you, so you don't have to make it permanent inside your mind just because it mattered. It mattered. It happened. Changed you. And now, it can become part of the river behind you. There is a beautiful difference between saying, I need to get my old life back, and saying, I'm grateful I got to live that life. The first statement is resistance. The second is gratitude. One keeps you facing backward. The other allows you to carry the meaning forward. And maybe that's what you actually want. Not the old life. The meaning of the old life. Not the person exactly as they were. The love you experienced. Not your old self. The qualities you miss. Maybe you miss how adventurous you were. Then become adventurous again. Maybe you miss how social you were. Start talking to people again. Maybe you miss how curious you were. Start learning again. Maybe you miss how alive you felt. Start doing things that make you feel present. Don't try to resurrect the past. Extract what was alive in it. Bring that forward. This is how the past becomes wisdom instead of weight. You don't carry the entire house. You carry what the house taught you. You don't carry the relationship. You carry what loving taught you. You don't carry the failure. You carry what failing taught you. You don't carry the old identity. You carry the parts that still serve you. Everything else can be released. And there will be moments when you think you've finally let go, and then suddenly you're back there. A song plays. A photograph appears. Someone mentions their name. You visit a familiar place. And for a moment, the whole past comes rushing back. Don't panic. That doesn't mean you've failed. Healing isn't a straight line. Letting go isn't a switch. Sometimes the memory will return. Let it. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to turn it into a 3-hour mental movie. You can simply notice. There's that memory. There's that sadness. There's that old version of me. And then, let it pass. Like a cloud. Like weather. Like a wave. You don't have to destroy a wave to stop drowning in it. You simply stop fighting the ocean. And perhaps this is the deepest part of letting go. You don't actually let go of the past. You let go of your demand that the past be different. You let go of the argument. You stop saying, they should have, I should have, it could have, it would have. You stop trying to negotiate with something that cannot hear you, and something inside you becomes quiet. Not because you got the answer, but because you finally stopped asking the past to change. Think about water again. If you close your fist, you lose it. If you open your hand, the water is free to move. And perhaps that's what love requires too. Not, stay exactly as you were, but, I loved what we were. Thank you. Now you can become whatever you're going to become. And I can become whatever I'm going to become. That's not abandonment. That's respect for reality. Maybe you've been waiting for permission to move forward. Waiting until you stop missing them. Waiting until you stop regretting it. Waiting until you understand everything. Waiting until you no longer feel sad. But maybe you don't have to wait. You can move forward while still missing someone. You can build a new life while still remembering the old one. You can laugh again without betraying what you lost. You can love again without erasing the love that came before. You can become someone new without declaring that the old you was worthless. Life doesn't require you to erase one chapter before beginning another. You can turn the page with tears in your eyes. And one day, something strange may happen. You'll remember. But it won't hurt in the same way. You'll think about that person. And instead of, what if? You'll think, that was a part of my life. You'll remember the place. And instead of, I wish I could go back, you'll think, I'm glad I was there. You'll remember who you used to be. And instead of, I need to become that person again, you'll think, that person brought me here. And suddenly, the memory is no longer a prison. It's simply a room in the house of your life. You can visit it. You can remember it. You can smile. You can cry. And then, you can leave. Maybe that's what letting go really is. Not forgetting. Not becoming indifferent. Not pretending you never cared. Not destroying photographs. Not hating people who hurt you. Not convincing yourself that the past was meaningless. It's much simpler than that. It's allowing what happened to remain what happened. No more, no less. You stop adding imaginary endings. You stop demanding alternate timelines. You stop punishing yourself for decisions you made with the awareness you had. You stop waiting for someone else to give you closure. You stop asking the past to return. And you turn around. Because life is still happening. There are people you haven't met yet. Places you've never seen. Conversations you've never had. Versions of yourself you've never experienced. There are mornings you haven't woken up to. Songs you haven't heard. Ideas you haven't discovered. Friends you haven't made. Things you haven't created. And perhaps even a version of yourself you can't imagine yet. But you won't meet that person if you spend your entire life trying to become someone you used to be. You won't experience what is coming if you remain emotionally loyal to what has already ended. And this doesn't mean you have to rush. Move slowly. Grieve. Rest. Remember. But move, even if it's one step. So if there's something you're still holding, a person, a moment, a mistake, a relationship, a dream, an old identity, ask yourself one question. Not, how do I get it back? Ask, what am I actually refusing to accept? Maybe you're refusing to accept that they changed. Maybe you're refusing to accept that you changed. Maybe you're refusing to accept that you made a mistake. Maybe you're refusing to accept that the opportunity is gone. Maybe you're refusing to accept that the future you imagined isn't the future you're living. Whatever it is, look at it honestly. Don't run from it. Don't decorate it. Don't romanticize it. Don't attack it. Just see it. And then say, this is what happened. Let the sentence be enough. Because the past doesn't need another argument. It doesn't need another analysis. It doesn't need another imaginary conversation. It needs to be allowed to become the past. And you need to become the person who lives after it, the person who takes the lesson, the person who carries the love, the person who accepts the scar, the person who keeps walking, because life has already moved. It has been moving this entire time. The seasons didn't stop because your heart was broken. Morning kept arriving. People kept growing. The world kept turning. And somewhere inside all of that movement, you were still standing at an old door, waiting for it to open. Maybe it's time to stop waiting. Not because what was behind the door didn't matter, but because there is an entire world in front of you. You cannot hold water by closing your fist around it. The tighter your grip, the faster it disappears. Open your hand. Let the water be water. Let the memory be a memory. Let the person be part of your history. Let the old version of yourself rest. Let the chapter end. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it was. And beautiful things are allowed to end. A song can end. A sunset can end. A childhood can end. A relationship can end. A season can end. And the ending doesn't make the experience meaningless. It makes it complete. Maybe letting go isn't losing something. Maybe letting go is finally stopping yourself from losing everything else to that one thing. Your present, your attention, your energy, your curiosity, your ability to love, your ability to experience something new, your own life. Because the greatest tragedy isn't that something ended. The greatest tragedy would be allowing something that ended years ago to keep consuming years that haven't happened yet. So remember, but don't live there. Love what was, but don't demand that it return. Learn from what happened, but don't punish yourself with it. Carry the wisdom. Leave the weight. And when the memory comes, let it come. When it leaves, let it leave. You don't have to hold everything that touches your heart forever. Some things are meant to touch you, change you, and continue moving. Like water, like time, like life itself. And maybe, the moment you stop closing your fist, you'll discover that letting go wasn't about losing the thing you loved. It was about finally opening your hand so you could receive what comes next.